Sotah Daf Vez. We begin the new Masechta Sotah, which discusses the Torah's sugya of a Sotah. A Sotah is a woman who has been accused of unfaithfulness by her husband. Sotah could be a Sotah Vadai, that is a woman who is certainly unfaithful, and we know that through testimony, or a Sotah Safek, and that is the primary focus of this Masechta, where he went through a certain procedure. She's established as potentially having been unfaithful but not proven, and he can check that by bringing her to the Beis Hamikdash, where she'll drink the special Sotah water. That is primarily what the sugya is about. The Masechta is about. Now, the process is as follows. He has to first do what's called kinoi, which is that he warns her not to be secluded, or any manner of warning that includes within it not to be secluded with a certain man, a specific individual, and then she goes and violates the warning. So that's what he does. Is the warning is called kinoi from the lashon from the wording of the psukim describing it, v'kinei sishtai, and what she does by ignoring the warning and being secluded with him is called stira from v'nistira. Now, once that happens, some halachas kick in. She is usher to him, to her husband. She is also, of course, usher to the man that she was secluded with. If her husband were to die at that point, she's usher to him. She also becomes usher to truma. And they now go to the Beis Hamikdash to begin. They first go to the Beis Din in their town, and they eventually go to the Sanhedrin to begin the actual drinking of the Sotah water procedure. So our mission discusses how you establish that kinoi and stira actually happened. So as far as kinoi, the Mishnah says very clearly, everyone agrees you need two witnesses. He has to warn her in front of two witnesses, because when they come to the Beis Din, he has to prove that he actually did the kinoi. And therefore, two witnesses have to see that and testify to that. Now, what about proving that she violated it? So here you have a machakas. Rabbi Eliezer says you need either one witness or no witnesses. He could just say that she violated it. And therefore, once he says that, or you have one witness who says that, they can go to the Beis Din HaGadol, and she can drink the Sotah water, and all the halachos kick in until then. Rabbi Yeshua says you have to have two witnesses. If two witnesses aren't there, it hasn't been seen by two witnesses, he won't be able to have her drink the water, and therefore those halachas don't kick in either. Now, what is the procedure? How exactly does the kinoi and stira work? So the Mishnah describes he could say any manner of warning. He could say, don't even speak to that man. Doesn't have to say, don't be alone with that man. Don't even speak to that man is fine. However, the stira is only being alone with him. So if he says, don't speak to him, and then she goes and she speaks to him, as long as she's not alone with him, it's not a stira. Stira has to be that she's alone with him. If she's alone with him for a period of time long enough that a bia could have been accomplished, then it's a stira, and now you have kinoi and stira, and the halachos apply. She's usher to him, she's usher to the man that she was alone with, she's usher to truma, and if her husband were to die and she would fall to yibum, she cannot do yibum, but she does require chalitza. We now begin the Gemara. The Gemara's first order of business is to understand why is this Masechta follow Nazir. Why is it Nazir and then Sotah? Why are they together? So the Gemara says the reason they're together is like we have the Parshios of Nazir and Sotah are together. And over there we explained a Brisa, quoted Rebbe, who said that the reason is because somebody who sees what happens to a Sotah, the degradation that she has to go through in the entire procedure, they rip her clothes and undo her hair and all those things. So he will learn that this was caused by too much wine, and he will become a Nazir. He will restrict himself from usage of wine. So the Gemara asks if that's true, so then Sotah should be first and then a Nazir, just like in the Torah in Parshas Naso, you first have Sotah and then a Nazir, because Nazir is a reaction to Sotah. So we should have Mesachas Nazir. We should have Mesachas Sotah first and then a Nazir. Why do we first have Nazir and then Sotah? So the Gemara explains this. The reason is because we wanted to get to Nedarim after Ksubis and to Nazir after Nedarim. Why? Because Ksubis has Perek Hamadir, which talks about the halachos of a husband as it relates to his wife's Nedarim. Therefore, we followed Ksubis with Nedarim, which discussed the halachos of Nedarim in general. And Nazir is a type of Neder, and therefore that makes sense to follow Nedarim. So only now can we get to Sotah after Nazir. And again, the reason is because of Rebbe that the two are linked. Next, the Gemara wants to discuss whether or not being mekana one's wife is a correct thing to do in a circumstance that calls for it. So Gemara will then get into the situation in which a man finds himself married to a woman that he finds to be inappropriate. How should he view that? So the Gemara says as follows: the Mishnah, the way it phrases a man who's mekana his wife, says it already happened. Someone who was mekana his wife with two witnesses, that's valid. The Gemara asks, that makes it sound like it's not something you should do. You don't tell somebody, go be mekana your wife. You say, if you did it, you have to have two witnesses for it to work. That seems to indicate it's not something you're supposed to do. So the Gemara says, yes, this Mishnah holds that it is not correct. It is forbidden for a person to be mekana his wife and create this entire parsha. The parsha was all written for people who do it anyway, but it's not something one is supposed to do. He should preferably not resort to this. Shmuel Bar Yitzchak says that when Reish Lakish would begin teaching the parsha of Sotah, he would say as follows about shidduchim. He would say the shidduch, the mate, which a person ends up matched with, it was given to him based on his actions. If he's a tzaddik, if he's a good person, he will be given a good woman, and if he's a wicked person, he will be matched with a wicked woman and then find himself in a wicked situation. How do you see that? So he quotes a pasuk to him, Kilo, I'll go al tzaddikim. You will not have the destiny of a rasha thrown in on tzaddikim. Tzaddikim won't end up with a rasha. It's not something that's going to happen. And therefore, if he's a tzaddik, he'll be married to a tzaddikas based on that. Okay, says Rabbi Yochanan, it is as difficult to make shidduchim, to make matches, as the splitting of the sea, as Kriyas Yamsuf. Where do you see that? So again quotes a pasuk in Tehillim. It says, "Alakim Moshev Yechidim Baisa." Hashem brings individuals to a house. That means he takes two individuals, a man and a woman who are separate, and brings them together in a home. And the next thing it says is Motzi Asir Mikosharis. He removes the bound in a good time. That's referring to Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's referring to when he took Klal Yisrael through the sea. So you see, he puts the two together, the making of shidduchim as the removal of Klal Yisrael from Mitzrayim. Now the Gemara asks, is it true that a person's spouse is designated for him based on his actions? How could that be? A person's spouse is assigned from him already before he's born, and before he's born, it's not determined if he'll be a tzaddik or a rasha. That's not something that heaven decides for people. It's up to them. So where do you see that it's assigned before they're born? So more quotes of Yehuda and Rabbah says 40 days before a child is formed, a voice comes out and says the daughter of such and such goes to such and such, the house of such and such goes to such and such, and the field such and such will be belonging to such and such. So you see, you're assigned your wife, your house, and your field, meaning your wife, your home, and your parnasa, your livelihood, is all assigned to you before one is born. So how could you say that it's depending on his actions if his actions haven't happened yet? So where it says there's two types of marriages. One's first marriage is assigned to him irrespective of his actions. If there's a second marriage, that goes by how he behaved up till that point. The Gemara now begins discussing, we've seen in our Mishnah what happens as far as how many witnesses you need to establish that the kinna happened, how many witnesses you need to establish that the stira happened, how many witnesses, though, the Mishnah doesn't say, do you need to establish that the tumah happened, that she actually was nevelas and she is usher. What if you have one witness that says that? Is that believed? There's two witnesses for sure believed. If there's no witnesses, we don't know. But if there's one aid, is that believed? So the Gemara says, and the fact that the Mishnah doesn't discuss it seems to imply that the only machlekes is about kinna and stira. But as far as tumah, one witness would be enough. On that, there's no argument. Everybody agrees that one witness is enough. We have a Mishnah that says that as well. It says that if one witness comes and says, I saw that she was mezanet, she was nitmeis, then you assume that that's the truth. And the nafkamina is that she cannot drink the sotah water now. Sotah water is only for someone who has a suffix. If you have a witness, so it's not a suffix anymore. So says Gemara, so well, how do you know midaraisa, this halacha, that one aid, one single witness is believed for this? Usually in Kol Hatar we find that one aid is not believed. So on that, the Gemara answers, we have a brisa, which makes the limud. It's on a pasuk v'shachav yeshaysa shechva zera v'nela me'eni isha v'nistra v'hinitma v'eid eimba v'hilo nispasa. This is talking about a woman who is guilty. It says v'hinitma, and then it says v'hilo nispasa, that she's guilty, she was tamei, and she wasn't forced. So we're talking about somebody who is guilty. Now, what do we say? We say v'eid einba. That means that you don't have two witnesses. Eid einba means you don't have testimony, you don't have two witnesses. So you see, it's just one witness, and that's enough to make her tamei. So the Gemara says, how do you know Eid Eimba means you don't have two witnesses? Maybe Eid Eimba means you don't have even one witness. Maybe she's tummy without any witnesses. The Gemara will ask soon, how's that possible? But the Gemara says, maybe it's only one witness. The Gemara says, no. Eid usually means two witnesses. How do you see that? Because there's one place where the Torah says Eid Echad. It means that if it would have just said Eid, I would have thought two. Eid Echad is to tell me that here the word Eid means one. But everywhere else, wherever it says aid, it means two. So here it says aid aimbo, you don't have two, but you do have one, and that one is enough to establish that she is guilty in this situation over here. Now, normally you would not trust one aid because it says yakum aid beish, you don't trust one, but this teaches over here that you do trust one in this circumstance over here. Now the Gemara spells out, how do you know that here we're talking about where she's guilty? So when it says, because it says v'hilein espasa, it means we're worried about was she forced or was she willing. It means we're obviously establishing that the guilt exists, otherwise there's nothing, it's irrelevant if she was forced or not. So the Gemara asks, that means that we're saying that because I learned from this that the one aid is enough to establish the guilt over here. The Havamina was that you don't even have one aid, the guilt exists. So the Gemara says, how do you have guilt with one aid? The Gemara says, no, that wasn't the Havamina. The Havamina was, what the pasuk is telling me is aid ainba, that one aid doesn't count. Aid is again referring to one aid. It's saying the aid ain ba, one aid is not enough. You have to have two aidim, and therefore we have this limud that's coming to say no, aid means two aidim, and it's coming to tell me that you don't have two aidim, you just have one, and therefore the one is enough over here. Now the Gemara asks, if it's telling me that you have to have two aidim according to what your havamina was, why would I need a pasuk for that? Obviously, the pasuk has to be telling me that one is enough, because to tell me that you need to have two eidim is in Kol Torah Kula. I know that all over. What would be the point in saying that? So Gemara says, no, there's a havamina here. There could have been a havamina that one aid was enough that I would have needed the Torah to tell me that you have to have two. And that is because here you have a stronger glam l'davar. There was kina, there was kinoi, there was stira, there was all these things. So there's definitely, even without the pasuk saying anything, I would have had a valid reason to think that one is enough. Therefore, I would have had a havamina that the Torah is coming to tell me that you have to have two. But that's not actually correct, because like we explained before, aid could mean that you don't have two, you just have one, and therefore that the Torah is l'maisa telling me that one is enough. It says, hold on a second. You were telling me before that you may have wanted to read the pasuk. The aid ain ba is saying that one aid is not enough, and you have to have two. If it's saying that one aid is not enough, then it's talking about a woman who is mutter. But this pasuk is talking about a woman who's usher. It's saying one aid is not enough. So what's it coming to? How do you read it? One aid is not enough, and therefore she is mutter. But we're talking about Isser here. It's talking about v'hilein espasa. Says, no, you would have read it like this. One aid is not enough. You have to have two. And in a case where you have two, then you would have to have v'hilein espasa. You would have to establish that it wasn't forced. Okay, next, the Gemara wants to know what underlies the machlokas between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar as to whether you need to have two aidim to establish stira. So the Gemara says they all learn the same drasha. The Torah, when it's describing that one aid is enough for tumah, it says ve'aid ein ba. Only here is one aid enough, but there's something else where you have to have two aidim. So everyone agrees that that's referring to the kinoi. You have to have two aidim for a kinoi. The question is it also referring to stira? So Rabbi Yeshua says it's referring to both kinoi and stira. Rabbi Elazar says it's only referring to kinoi. It's not referring to stira. So the Gemara says, how do you know that? So the Gemara says, very simple. Stira is linked to tumah. The Torah says, v'nistra v'hine tumah. It puts stira and tumah together. Just like tumah, we've already established, is enough to have one aid, stira is enough to have one aid. Kinoi, however, still needs two witnesses. So the Gemara asks, well, hold on a second. Kinoi is also linked to tumah. It says v'kinei ishtai v'hine tumah. So that by the same logic, you could say that just like tumah is enough to have one, kinei is enough to have one, and it's only stira that requires two. So the Gemara says no, but the Torah explicitly said ba. So something has to be requiring two, because that's what the drasha is. So if you have linking both kinoi and stira to tumah, you're telling me that both of them is enough, only one. So what do I do with the drasha? So Gemara says, you're right. You have a problem. What do you do with the drasha? It has to apply to one of them, but you still don't know which one. So the Gemara says no. So stira is more likely is the better one, because stira is what creates the tumah. So it's more likely that stira has the same halach of tumah and it requires only one aid. So Gemara says, what do you mean? Kinoi is the beginning of the process. That's how you start the whole thing. So Gemara says, well, if not for stira, kinoi would be worth nothing. So Gemara says, if not for stira, kinoi would be worth nothing. So we're going back and forth here. We still don't see why is kinoi or stira better than any other one. So the Gemara says, no, stira is better because it is the beginning of the process. It's what launches the tumah. It's the beginning of the actual tumah process. And therefore, stira is the one that's going to have the same halacha as tumah, that it's enough to have just one, according to Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara now notes there's a different brisa that has a different version of Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. This is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda. He brings Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that has a third option. He says that you only have to have two edim for the stira part. For the kinoi, you don't have to have two edim. You have to have one eid or no edim at all is fine. So the Gemara says the same cheshbon. How does he learn that? Again, he has the limud from the fact that it says ein ba, aid ein ba, only by it, but something else you have to have two aidim. What's that referring to? It's referring to the stira, but the kino you don't have to have. And that the Gemara asks, how do you know it's referring to the stira needs to aidim? Maybe it's referring to the kino that needs to aidim. And the stira you don't have to have to aidim. Gemara says no, we can't be referring to kino because kino is linked to tumah. We have a hekesh between kino and tumah, like we said before. So we said we have a hekesh between stira and tumah also. So again, maybe stira and tumah is the one that is enough to have just one aid, just like tumah. So Gemara says, no, that can't be. The link between stira and tumah is for something else. That's to teach me that the length of time that is required for a stira to count is the time it takes for tumah to happen. The time it has to be for a ma'aseh bia to occur. And therefore, that's what that link is for. And therefore, you don't have that link to stira. There is only a link between tumah and kinoi that's relevant to teach me that kinoi does not have to have two edim, but stira is what we learn from ba requires two edim. Now, the Gemara says that the Chachamim responded to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda's pshat, and they said if you want to say that you don't have to have witnesses for kinoi, say ain't l'davar seif. It could go on forever, because the guy could keep on saying anytime she was alone, he could say, "Oh, I was makana," even though he wasn't, and this could keep on happening again and again. So Gemara asks, what kind of answer is that? Why don't you say the same thing in their pshat, the same way they understand in Rabbi Eliezer, they hold that the kinoi you have to have two edim, but the stira you don't have to have two edim. So you could keep on saying again and again that she was beseser, and he doesn't have to prove that. So also in the davar seif. So the Gemara answers what it means to say is that even according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, there's no end. In our Mishnah, there is no end, but even in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, there's no end. The Gemara says, what do you mean? The even goes the other way. In our Mishnah, at least he had to start the process with witnesses. And therefore, it's not so easy to happen. He had to have begun it with witnesses when he didn't just he threw it after. He had to have done an actual kina before. So that's less likely to be ein l'davar seif. Rabbi Yehuda is more likely to be ein l'davar seif because he didn't have to have started the process at all. He could have just had where there was a stira, and then he just makes up that he started the process, but it never actually happened. So it's more likely to be ein l'davar seif. So the Gemara says, you're right. What it should be is we should say, what the Chachamim were saying was, according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is ein l'davar seif, and even in our Mishnah is ein l'davar seif because he could keep on saying that he did a stira after once he did the kinoi one time. Gemara now quotes Rabbi Chanina of Surah, says today in our days that there's no sotah water. A person should be careful not to say to his wife, "Don't be together in seclusion with this man," because if we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, you don't require witnesses for a kinoi to be effective. If that's true, so then that was a kinoi. If that was a kinoi, then from now she's already in a matzav of kinoi, and if she were to go and to be mistater with that man, she has kinoi and stira. The halacha is the kinoi and stira. She's also to her husband until she's checked by the sotah water. But there is no sotah water. So by saying to his wife, "Don't be alone with that man," he's putting himself in a situation that if she will, he's also to her forever, and you can't get out of it because there's no sotah water, and the entire procedure doesn't exist. So therefore, make sure not to say those words. Okay, now the Gemara quotes Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, what does the word kina mean? Kina means something which causes hatred between her and the rest of the world. That means, says the Gemara, Rish Lakish must hold that kinoi is something that he does on his own without any witnesses. So the word doesn't get out that he said kinoi to her, that he said to her, "Don't be alone with this man," or "Don't be alone with any man." And therefore, no one knows about it. And they're all going to wonder, why did her behavior change? And now she doesn't want to speak to anybody. She doesn't want to be seen with anybody. What's going on? And I think she hates them, and therefore creates hatred between her and the rest of the world. So you see, Rish Lakish holds that kinoi is something that is without witnesses. I like that opinion. Now the Gemara quotes Rav Yemar Bar Shammai in the name of Abaye, who says that's not what kina means. Kina means that it creates anger between him and her. That means that the rest of the world knows about it, but it's him and her. It's him who created that hatred from her by doing something, and the rest is going to find out that this is fight between them. So you see, he holds that kina is something that has to have witnesses, and she's upset that the rest of the world knows about this.